You can think of a country's economy like this huge, complicated garden. If you just leave it alone, sure, lots of things will grow just fine, but you also get weeds, right? Some plants get thirsty, pests show up, and that's when the gardener has to step in. In this case, the gardener is the government. So let's go see how they get their hands dirty.
And that really brings us to the big question, doesn't it? We hear all the time about how amazing and efficient free markets are. So why can't we just let them do their thing? Well, it turns out even the best markets have some pretty serious blind spots.
And that's where we start. We're going to look at those moments when a totally hands-off approach, well, it just doesn't work out for everybody.
There's a name for this. Economists call it a market failure. Now, this isn't about a single company going out of business. No, this is when the entire system, the market itself, fails to produce the best result for society. Basically, it's when everyone doing what's best for them individually ends up making things worse for the group as a whole.
And these failures pop up in a few classic ways. For instance, the market would never create something like a national defense force on its own. It can also lead to massive gaps between the rich and poor, or crazy economic roller coasters. But the one we're really going to focus on today is something called an externality.
So what in the world is an externality? Let's make it simple. Think about driving your car. The money you pay for gas, that's your private cost. It's what it costs you. But your driving also adds to pollution and traffic, right? Those are costs that everyone else has to deal with. When you add those costs on top of your gas price, you get the real social cost. And here's the problem. The market price you pay, it usually only covers your private part. That gap, that's a market failure.
Okay, so we've got a problem. The market is creating these gaps between what things cost us personally and what they cost society. How does the government step in and try to fix it? Well, this is where they open up their economic toolkit.
And the biggest, most important tool in that entire kit, the one they use for just about everything, is something called fiscal policy.
Fiscal policy sounds super technical, but I promise it's not. It really just comes down to two things: how the government brings money in, mostly taxes, and how the government spends that money. By pulling these two levers, spending and taxing, a government can try to steer the entire economy.
So first up, where does all the money come from? Let's take a look at the numbers for 2024. See that huge purple slice? That's the value-added tax, or VAT. It's bringing in almost a third of all the money. And that light blue piece? That's income taxes, making up about a quarter of the total. It's kind of wild to see how just a couple of major taxes do most of the heavy lifting.
All right, now for the other side of the coin, where does all that money go? And this is where things get pretty shocking. Look at that massive pink slice. That's over half, 54% of all regular government spending in 2024. And it's just to pay the interest on money we've already borrowed. Think about that for a second. More than half the budget is gone before a single salary gets paid or a single family gets a support payment.
That giant interest payment we just saw, well, it's a direct result of a really basic challenge that's at the heart of all of this: balancing the nation's budget.
It's really simple, just like your own bank account. When a government spends more money in a year than it brings in from taxes and other revenue, you get a budget deficit.
And as you can see from this chart, running a deficit isn't a one-time thing. This has been happening for a while. Just look at the bars for 2022 and 2023. We've consistently been in the red. And even though it's projected to get a little smaller in 2024, the pattern is pretty clear. We are spending way more than we're making.
So how do you fill that hole every year? You borrow. And this is the most important part. This year's borrowing, that deficit, gets piled right on top of last year's and the year before that. That giant growing pile of money from all the past deficits, that becomes the national debt.
Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, and honestly the most important one. What are the consequences of letting that pile of debt get bigger and bigger?
This chart really helps you see the scale of the problem. The bars show you the total amount of money we owe, but the thing you really need to pay attention to is that rising pink line. That shows our total debt compared to the size of our entire economy. In 2023, the total government debt hit 103.9% of our gross domestic product. Okay, just let that sink in for a minute. That means the total amount of money the government owed was more than the value of every single thing produced and every service provided in the entire country for a whole year. That is a massive weight on the economy. And this brings us right back to that spending chart from earlier. This table right here is, wow, look at that bottom line. In 2023, for every $100 the government collected in revenue, it had to spend almost $140 just servicing its debt. It's like being in a financial vice grip, squeezing out any money that could be spent on other things, like hospitals, roads, or schools. And that's really the question we're left with, isn't it? Governments have to step in to fix the market's problems and take care of people today. But when you pay for that by borrowing, you create this huge bill that someone has to pay tomorrow, probably with higher taxes or fewer services. Finding that balance, it isn't just an economic puzzle. It's one of the toughest questions a country has to answer about what kind of future it wants to build.